Hi, this is David Heine, and today we're in Nijmegen at what is called the Cannabis Castle. With us today is Alan Dronkers, who is the owner and operator of the Cannabis Museum in Amsterdam, also Sensi Seed Company, which is one of the oldest marijuana seed companies in the world. Alan, I remember in 1970 when I was first in Amsterdam that there wasn't any coffee shops or places that you could go. It was still an underground marijuana scene. It's all changed now, hasn't it? And how did that come about?
Well, there was some big research done first by the government in the beginning of the 1970s by the so-called Baan Commission. And they came to the conclusion, first of all, that cannabis products were not as harmful as other drugs. So there was a clear separation made within the Dutch law between soft and hard drugs. And it was the first step into the direction of the separation of the market. This was the next goal to do. It was clear that the health risks of cannabis products was not as great as with other drugs like heroin or as LSD in this time. And the Dutch government was seeing the drugs especially as a health hazard, as a health problem, and not so much as a problem for the Justice Department or the police to solve or deal with.
Well, it's still really not quite legal in Holland, is it? What is the real status of marijuana here in Holland?
Yes, you're right. Right now, for example, we see a lot of coffee shops where openly cannabis products are sold. This started also in the 1970s, first in youth houses where young people would hang out, and they had all kind of activities there. These were sponsored places by the government in that time, where first house dealers started to deal hashish and marijuana to young people, so they wouldn't go to other dealers that were also sell hard drugs. And in the beginning of the 1980s, the government started to cut down all kind of budget, and especially cut the subsidizations to these youth houses. So these youth houses disappeared. And after that, basically these house dealers started the first coffee shops. Well, coffee shops were easy to start in this time. And in this coffee shop, they would they have the same practice. They would have a bag with some cannabis, some hashish in there, and they would sell it to the people that knew that that's the house dealer, there I can buy something. And slowly more and more coffee shops got around in Holland, and they were tolerated, which means that basically the sale of hashish and marijuana is completely illegal. But because everybody understood that it was better that it was sold openly and controlled, they decided to tolerate or do nothing. Toleration is basically doing nothing. First, what you see also is that these coffee shops were closed 10 times, 15 times, and then the police got tired and they decided to let it be. And that's what we call toleration. And up till now is that in the beginning of the 1990s, we see that the government comes with a lot more rulings, especially also 94, 95. There were some more rulings, 96 also. So there's a lot of rulings for these coffee shops, a lot of rules where they have to fit in and apply to. But in fact, these coffee shop owners still don't have a legal position. Let be that the cannabis is legal or the sale of it is legal. It is still all illegal. It's all illegal. The clear difference what we have is that up to 30 grams, it is seen as a misdemeanor. So if you, and as a perfect personal use amount, so they will not enact, they will not do something. But above 30 grams is still a crime, and police officially will do something about it when people have more than that amount. Of course, coffee shops do have always a higher amount of products in stock, but this is now already changed, or anyway they made some special ruling for that also, that a coffee shop should not have more than 500 grams in a shop. This is of course a crime, a criminal offense to have that in your shop, but the public ministry basically puts the priority on tracking down the sale and production of and use of hard drugs, and is not putting his attention to coffee shops. So that's why we see that the sale is still happening in Holland. Yeah.
One thing that's always perplexed me with the illegality of these coffee shops, where are they supplied from?
Well, this is the gray area. We always talk about the front door of the coffee shop and the back door of the coffee shop. So the front door of the coffee shop is regulated. It's not legalized, but regulated. Everybody knows how it's working, and there's no real illegal thing happening anymore, except that it's still illegal by law, but it's regulated. The back door of the coffee shop is still completely illegal, should have police priority still, but in practice it doesn't. And in fact, it's still a complete mess, and that's only up to the politicians that up till now didn't want to stick their neck out or get in trouble with other international countries because we were so lenient towards soft drugs here in Holland. So it's international pressure in the first place already in the 1970s that made the Dutch government decide not to legalize in that time. In that time it was the oil crisis and the pro-Israeli standpoint of the Dutch government that was already putting them in a very lonesome position internationally, and they are still afraid that if the Dutch government is going to take this step towards legalization, that basically the whole world is going to fall over us. Yeah.
Well, in fact, it has created some problems in the EU with the French government, I understand.
Yeah, it did, but this is mainly in the news and in the media, and this is a little bit loud screaming in the middle of the drug war, and basically it means not that much what we see in practice on the ground floor and the level where people work with hard drug junkies and needle exchange, and in practice we see that in France, even there, Dutch systems and Dutch ideas are copied rapidly the last few years. So even though they still make a lot of noise against drugs, and they really try to heat up this war against drugs, in reality that is only the politicians on the top. The people that have to work in practice, the people that are on the street, even the police, they have a much more a better standpoint, a better overthought idea about drugs than just say something. Drugs are bad, blah blah blah, against drugs. But that's what they do. But are there any arguments? Is there any scientific basis, background for that? No, there isn't. There's in fact arguments for the Dutch system, and there's in fact arguments to finally legalize.
Earlier we were discussing prohibition. Maybe this is a good time to address that. You have a particular theory that I'm very interested in about prohibition. Maybe you'd like to explain that.
I don't know what part you're referring to the history or to the idea of prohibition itself. My idea is generally that prohibition is one of the big lies of this century. There's probably a couple of more, but this is one of them for sure. And the lie is so big that it's sometimes very difficult to see how it all fits together and how it's working. But if we look back into history, and for example, it all starts with the Opium Wars and the situation in Asia at that time, and the colonial countries like Holland and the United States and England that were dealing with opium, especially in China at that time. And one of the things they discovered was that when the Chinese government made opium illegal, suddenly something which didn't have too much value was suddenly very valuable. And something that was they were not making too much money on, they could suddenly make a lot of money on. And what I think is what happened in 1912 here in The Hague, when the first international opium laws were created, is that they decided to put the whole scheme on for the world. In that sense, that they would make opium a valuable product worldwide. And later in the next opium meetings they had in the 20s and 28, they decided to take cannabis and hashish also within these international opium laws and made of something that was basically unvaluable, had no value, hardly any value, to make it valuable and worthy all across the globe. So mafia, legal or illegal, could start to make money on something that was before it was not possible to make money on. That is what generally is my idea. So it's not so much the 1930s where big international corporations like DuPont were having a problem with fiber hemp, especially for the production of paper, for example, because they had the right to produce the patent on the process of making pulp for paper out of wood stems. This is and the pharmaceutical companies that were basically had all kind of interest where cannabis could be a natural competitor to their products. This is certainly true, but it was not the actual reason why cannabis got illegal, because cannabis got already illegal in the 1920s globally. In fact, it was added within the opium laws, and the opium laws, that's where it all started. They were intended in the first place not to protect people, because how many opium addicts were there globally? A few in China, and that's it. But simply the mechanism, money, making something that has no value very valuable, was something that is discovered, and it's in fact a historical fact that for example, our royal family, the Oranges, they were broke before the opium trade started, and in fact now it's one of the richest families in the world, and it's clear that they made the money on opium trade.
Alan, I'd like to ask you now, you have a museum, and in this museum you cover a wide variety of topics. One of the topics, of course, is the human's long association with marijuana and hashish. Could you give me a little of that history?
Oops. Yeah, well, as you say, and as you can saw already, this history is very old and goes very far back. Here in the Netherlands, there's evidence that already in the golden ages, in this time, especially farmers and poor people were using of mixtures of tobacco and hemp for smoking, especially famous painters, Teniers and Adrian Brouwer and Zorg. They made a lot of paintings with the smoking farmers. And if you look very carefully to the expression on their faces, you will also see that these people are not just smoking normal tobacco. And for example, colonies like the Dutch Indies were producing tobacco also, and especially from places like that, these mixtures of tobacco with other herbs, including cannabis, was coming from Indonesia. And there's more than one source that say that.
Not only the Dutch history, but there's a vast history in India.
Oh, yeah, enormous. And how old it really is, it's thousands of years old, that's for sure. But if we know that already, the mentioning in the Vedas and stuff, then it's, what should it be, 6,000-8,000 years old, that this connection is already there with this plant. In fact, there are some people that say that it was one of the first agricultural crops used by humanity.
So historically, we know that it was used in India, and it was one of the early crops for humans. What was the introduction of it to the West? Do we know anything about that history?
We do a little, of course. These colonial ages were bringing over information about cannabis, and cannabis was generally used in these areas as a medicine. What we also can see is that at the same time we were sort of rediscovering this plant also as a medicine. We see that especially in the centuries before us, the 2 centuries before us, cannabis was a very important medicine. It was part of most medicines that were available, and even Also in Holland, we see that 16th, 17th century pots that bear the name cannabis, that come from basically herbalists that were using it within different mixtures that they were preparing for people as medicine. A very good example is William Salisbury, the private doctor of Queen Victoria, and he was also prescribing hashish for menstrual cramps in that time, menstrual pain. And he sort of rediscovered this. And what you see is that slowly the medical science was very interested in this product. But within this century is that you see that a lot of materials got chemically synthesized, and slowly we moved away from all natural products, where originally all these medicine came from.
Speaking of that, we moved away from the old hemp ropes and the cloth and everything. We're kind of rediscovering that as well as medicine again, aren't we?
Yeah, exactly. You know, probably, you know, the hemp plant was in our history not so much important for its active ingredients, psychoactive ingredients, or its medicinal use. It was probably most important as a resource, especially what you say, cloth. Sailing boats couldn't go without hemp. Next, after wood, hemp was the main ingredient you needed to build a ship in this time. And you must know that every ship was carrying tons of hemp just to be a ship. And many things, discovery of the new world and many other things would never have happened without this plant. So, in fact, in our history, this is clearly our most important resource plant that we had. Nowadays, where we understand that all kind of things are going wrong with our environment, and especially there's something wrong with our resources, and that means that these resources we use nowadays are not durable, are not renewable. That's why we start to rediscover hemp as a resource, because hemp is durable and hemp is renewable and sustainable. So which means that it's if we come to the point where we start to make many of our products with hemp again, we can basically, this is right away positive effect for the environment.
Now you have a lot of different kind of people passing through that museum. Who basically comes there?
Everybody, really everybody. Really everybody. I mean, groups of the police school or a narcotic brigade from Sweden or law students or medical students or just grandmothers and fathers up to kids from 14, 15 years old. Everything walks into the museum, and that is the great part. It's not specifically there for people who have, for example, only interest in the smoking of marijuana. This is a museum about hemp, about cannabis, and it's there to teach people something. It's there to open their mind in certain ways, to broaden their perspective or their ideas about this plant. When we just met, you told me that you walked into our museum and you learned something, and that's exactly where this is about. Not only you have learned something in our museum, but in fact my goal is, and our goal is with this museum, that everybody who walks into the museum, even if he knows a lot about cannabis already, or some people who have no idea, never had any books or any information about this plant, that they walk out of the museum saying, gee, I didn't know that. Wow, I've learned something. And if there's one problem for the hemp plant, for cannabis, in this world, it is lack of knowledge, lack of information, ignorance, so to speak. And this is something that can only be changed by giving information, by teaching people about their history. Because That's all we do. It's not, we don't make up a story, you know, this is our history. We present our history, and unfortunately we cannot find this history in our school books. We cannot find this history in most other museums, because if it has something to do with hemp, it has something to do with drugs, and people are still sort of scared of that. So better not to know nothing about it, or better not to talk about it because it's something bad. And this is the wrong idea. We should learn about this. In fact, the more we learn about this, the better our ideas can get. And plus, even if something is bad or scary, if a young adult has learned about the dangers and the possibilities and whatsoever, everything that has to do with drugs, then you can be sure that this young adult will make the right choice. If his mother told him all his life, you better know nothing about it and stay away from it, but one day he doesn't stay away from it, he still knows nothing about it. And that's where the mistakes happen, and that's where things go wrong. Let us be honest, you know. I am very much against drugs, against hard drugs especially. I hate hard drugs. I just want to make very clear that cannabis can also be used as a recreational drug. But this is also a resource. This is also a resource for farmers that is around us already for thousands of years. And this is also a very, very important medicine for some very sick people in the world today. And what makes me happy is that, for example, 8-9 years ago, when I was telling journalists about this, that this was a medicine, they laughed at me. It was like, okay, Mr. Dronkers, you smoke another one, ha ha ha. But today, it's not a joke anymore. Even our Minister of Health is talking about marijuana as a medicine. Even in England or in the United States, marijuana is discussed about also as a medicine. And this is what makes me happy. Makes me happy because it's not good for me. I don't care, you know. I'm not sick. I'm not dying of AIDS, or I don't have cancer, or I don't have MS or glaucoma. You know, I'm a healthy person. But for people who are really sick, patients that before they were calling me from England like, yeah, my wife is 56 and I am 55 and I was a pilot before and my wife has MS and now I have to go to some dealer on the street to buy her some hashish and I don't know how to give it to her. And this was the reality of just 5-6 years ago, that people were calling me from all over the place for information, for help. Did I know a doctor that could help him? Did I know some patient union that could give him information or help him? In this time, I didn't know, because it was still something that most people didn't want to hear, didn't want to believe, doctors didn't want to listen or see. But now it's a completely other story. It's proving itself day by day. In fact, the patients themselves, they are proving it. I knew it already a long time. In fact, there's a difference between knowing and knowing in this case also, because I was talking already for years about medical marijuana before I met the first MS patients. And when I met the first MS patient, it was something else. It was not, I didn't only know that this was a medicine, I realized this was a medicine. And if you see somebody like this, and he can suddenly control his muscles again after smoking a joint, literally stand up out of his wheelchair, this is something that, as a person, it moves me, and it makes me only stronger to fight the ignorance, to fight the propaganda that is produced about this plant for so many years already, that are clear ignorance and lies. And I just wish that this lying of the media, let us be honest, the media has a great part in this also, about this plant will stop, and more realistic programs will honestly show people what this plant is all about.
Now, speaking of plants, we've talked a little about marijuana and we've talked about hemp. Your museum makes a third distinction, and that is hashish. What is the difference between marijuana and hashish?
Well, hashish and marijuana are basically same products. The marijuana is the dried female flower of the hemp plant, and if you look with a microscope to this flower, you will see that there's some gland, some resin on this flower. If you look with a microscope, you can see that it's all little stems with balls on top, like see-through. Transparent material, and this is the resin. Once these flowers are dried and they are made fine, and then they do that above a fine screen, then all these small balls will go to the finest screen, and these stems also, and then what you get is a very fine powder, pollen they say, and when this is pressed, then you have hashish. So there is a distinction. Hashish and marijuana are not the same, because hashish is a piece of black stuff or brown stuff, and marijuana is just a green dried flower, right? An herb. But in reality, they're the same. They come from the same material, the same active ingredient, the hashish on this flower. They're both natural product. There's no chemical process or cooking down with chemicals or whatsoever, like happens with heroin or cocaine or something. Both hashish and marijuana are natural products that you get from the dried female flower of the hemp plant.
Now, another part of your business or your enterprise here is a Sensi Seed company. It's a very old company in the sense of modern times, dealing with types of seeds of these plants. Can you tell me a little of the origin of this company?
Well, this company started in 1984, so we exist 15 years now. What you can see is that genetics, basically people up to the 70s here in Holland, nothing much happened. The first people that started to grow cannabis plants used just pigeon food or fiber hemp stuff to grow their plants from, and the quality of this hemp wasn't too great, of course. But already in this time, there were people in the United States, for example, that were collecting seeds from various places, and also the first hippies from here, like my father, went to India and all these places to discover not only hashish and marijuana, but also to bring back seeds. And in the beginning of the 80s, you see that all these seeds come together from the United States and the people here in Holland that collected them. And then the first breeding program started. So people really started to put work into breeding new hybrids with these pure strains or hybrids that were already created. And that revolutionized the quality, yes.
Part of the idea, as near as I can tell, is to make distinguishing characteristics of these various plants. How do you go about doing that?
It's a bit tricky. You are always looking for specific characteristics of a plant. You talk about breeding, I guess, and if you breed, you know also that people here in Holland they have to grow the plant outdoor, which means that it should at least finish at a certain time, or they grow it indoor or in a greenhouse, and then people want to have compact flowers with a nice odor, and they should not take half a century to finish. So basically people want plants that produce a lot of flowers in a short time period with a high quality. If you would only look at those characteristics, your choice would be limited already pretty quickly to mainly indicas, and that is not what is really that interesting. Especially hybrids made with indicas and sativas, for example, produce more fruity smelling plants, and also the effects, for example, of high are much more related to sativas than the indica, more low stoned on the body effect. So these kind of things are, for example, things people found out already pretty quick. And these characteristics, for example, odor, is something that for Sensi Seed Bank is also very important. That if you find, for example, a parent that doesn't have the right smell, it stops there. You cannot continue in this direction. So that's with breeding. It's like a Mendel's job. People are basically using these characteristics and selecting on these characteristics, sometimes back-crossing on certain characteristics. But it is not that we have some laboratory where there's genetic manipulation done or something like that. No, it's simply a very simple Mendel's job which is done.
You also, I've noticed in your catalog, which is printed in many languages, which is very helpful. I'm sure there's somebody from every country that wants to know how.
Yeah, a lot of people want to have this information, so we were basically forced to do that. I think we are more famous outside of Holland than inside Holland. Yeah.
But you also offer various kinds of technological advances or technological supplements to growing these things indoors, don't you?
Well, that's what generally people act like. You know, they blow this up like, ooh, they made special light, ooh, equipment and professional. But all this really is that existing agricultural equipment was used within some new ideas. For indoor growing operations, for example. So there hasn't been changed that much or revolutionized that much in that field. It is just that here in Holland we were able to use all this technology which was already there, hydroponics, light systems and so on, for our own specific crop. But in the end, it doesn't really matter if you're growing hemp or tomatoes with this equipment. Yeah.
Let me ask you something about the legality of growing it. Can every citizen in Holland grow a plant or two?
No, in fact, it's illegal to grow marijuana. It's always illegal to grow marijuana. Already one plant is illegal. They tolerate up to 4 plants, they say, but it's still illegal. What is legal is like if I want to grow seeds or if I want to grow fiber or wood, then it's legal to grow hemp plants. But if I want to grow marijuana, it's always illegal to grow hemp plants. Even the so-called low THC, EC registered hemp strains, you are not allowed to make marijuana of these plants.
We're here in one of the Sensi Seed growing rooms where they produce all those incredible seeds. Alan was going to tell us just a little bit about what's going on in this room.
Yeah, this is one of our production rooms. Here we produce seeds, so many times what I do is I use cuttings, but these are all seed plants. Basically, this is a part of the breeding program. So it's not always that I produce, it's at the same time I want to go forward also. And this is one of the rooms where you can see basically some silver pearls from seed, and you see it's a massive, big flowers on these plants. very resiny, nice odor. Yeah, it's just wonderful to work here with wonderful plants.
The marijuana plant has always been one of my favorites. It seems it has its own beauty and uniqueness. Here you've taken it out on its own limits, I think. What are some of your objectives when you're breeding these plants?
Well, what you generally see is that people grow indoor here in Holland under artificial lights. So because the growing on the lights is expensive for them, if they buy our seeds, they also want to have plants generally that don't flower too long, that don't stretch too much, and it's easy to grow. At the same time, they do like this sativa high, for example, and this fresh, fruity smell of sativas. Well, if you would only listen to the commercial grower, basically all that would be left was an indica, because it's short and the flower composition is good. But of course, for us it's interesting, and that is our main job, is to make interesting hybrids where we can have all the positive parts of the different strains, try to combine that in one hybrid, for example. This is the spraying system, by the way, we hear that's starting. We grow here on lava rocks together with a rock wool cube that's inside the pot.
So each of these plants that you have growing in here actually comes from a seed. It's not a cut.
In this room, yes, yeah. But a specific group of seeds, yeah. It's not. It's selected already. Yeah.
Let me ask you this. This bud right here and this incredible plant, how long does it take to get this size?
These are here already for about 8-9 weeks, and what you can see here is, like, here we have, this is a seed, yeah, that is just starting. This plant will need a lot more time before we finally have ripe seeds, right? But here this is already a seed that is coming up. So these plants will have to be here for another 3-4 weeks before I really finished.
Now, you said earlier when we were talking that growing plants for seeds is legal here in Holland?
That's up till today is still legal, yes. There's many signals that go into direction that this might change. Yeah.
So in this area where you're growing right now, what are the special conditions that you've created so that you get these marvelous plants?
Well, the special conditions are enough light, enough fertilizer, and enough of everything. So you just try to do everything, you create your own climate indoor, right? So you have everything under control. That means you have to play like Mother Nature for a little bit and try to make all the circumstances optimum as much as possible. And after that, it's up to your genetics. So within these circumstances, I'm pretty well able to make selections also, because the circumstances are also the same for every plant here. So the environmental differences are very little.
And you told me most of your experience is on the job sort of thing. You didn't go to the university to learn cannabis culture or anything. You've learned it all yourself. When you say you make selections based on certain criteria, does that mean you try it out, your friends try it out, you have samplers? Or?
Well, no, officially we cannot do that. We cannot produce marijuana, but already stick your nose in here. What do you think? This is
wonderful.
So that's what I do also. If I walk around here, already my nose, my eyes tell me a lot of what is happening. And these characteristics, the flower formation, the density of the flower, the odor is very, very important. I mean, if a plant, for example, smells bad, what are we gonna do with it? It's not a direction we should continue with our breeding program. So And of course, if we find something, some nice odor that we didn't smell before, then we decide to harvest that one or use that one anyway to continue in that direction.
So approximately how many seeds will you produce in a room of this size?
Depends a little bit what variety and the quality of the male that are brought inside, but it's kilos. Yeah, for every room.
Now you said the male you brought inside. Is that sort of like you bring a rooster to the hens, or?
Yes, a little bit like that. So we work here that we try to use as much as possible selected females that are pollinated or crossed with selected males. So it's not like, for example, many universities and stuff still work in a very old-fashioned way, where they make use of a group of parents or a group of males and a group of females get pollinated with each other, and then they select on the offspring of that, which is if you ask me, not the best way, because if you want stability, if you want uniformity, our method is much better. And it's interesting to see that, for example, the agricultural university here in Wageningen is copying some of our methods by now. Yeah.
At Sensi Seed, how many varieties of seeds do you now carry?
In our catalog, there's about 25, right? 25 varieties that are available. But that means that here we have, of course, a lot more different crosses made, and it always takes a lot of steps and a lot of time before something ends up in our catalog. So that's the reason why generally it's always just one or two varieties a year that we get new in our in what we offer, because it takes at least 2 to 4 years before a certain direction is good enough to start to sell the seeds of that.
I've noticed reading your catalog that you have some very interesting names for these various varieties. Who comes up with these names, and what are their origin?
Well, coming up with these names, sometimes they originate already from a long time ago, and many times it's a matter of inspiration, what we think should be a good name for this plant. So it's we do that ourselves.
Hi, this is David Heine, and we're at the Sensi Seed Bank now. With us today is Johnny, who he works here. He answers a lot of questions, works around the business itself. What I'd like to ask you is, this is a unique kind of experience for a lot of world shoppers, where they can come in and actually ask advice about growing this plant. What kind of questions and who do you get in here?
All different kinds of questions, from how do you sprout the seeds? Are the seeds all female? That's what people also think. Some people say it's possible, but it isn't really possible. The people who try to work with seeds to make them female, at the end the seeds will be hermaphrodite and don't have the right good quality, as you don't make any testing with the seeds to make them female. You should leave them as they are. You have 50% female, 50% male. And people ask, of course, the yield. How much do I get from a plant? That's also very important for them. How does it taste? Is it strong? Can I put it outside? Do I need special lamps? So many questions.
It almost seems like if you were working in a bookstore, you get all these questions about different things, but in this business you get one of the unique plants in the world. But how do you know all these answers?
I have a lot of experience. When I started it, I didn't know anything from plants. I had a plant at home, but I had to replace it each month because it was dying. But since I work here and grow it and live and grow with the plants, yeah, it gets better each day, of course. And I'm working here now for about 9 years, so I have a lot of experience. It's what I do 8 to 10 hours a day, working with the plants, growing them, looking at them. So yeah, you learn by mistakes. Yeah.
Well, 9 years is a good amount of experience. So you take your 9 years of experience and you tell the customers from their own description things that might be going wrong with their methods, and when they ask you about the potency, they all have different kinds of potency, don't they? I mean,
Yes, true.
how do you read the person when he says, how strong is it, or?
You mean, how do I read the person for that person? If
For
it's
that
too
person,
strong for
exactly.
them? No, I will ask if they have any experience with smoking. How often do they smoke and this and that. But it doesn't really matter, because when you grow the strongest plant there is, and it's done, it's dried, and you roll your first joint, then if you take 1 or 2 hits, you will find out. If it's strong, you lay it in the ashtray and leave it there for a couple of hours until you want another hit. If it's not strong, you smoke the whole joint, and maybe it will satisfy you then. I mean, it doesn't matter. But for me personal, I like to grow strong and nice, good tasty plants. That's what I want.
It seems everyone's desire, actually, if you were going to...
But on the other hand, those plants are sometimes more difficult to grow. The most easiest plant to grow, I think, is the skunk varieties, but they're not the most potent ones, and maybe not the most tasty ones. So.
And so those are the two kind of taste and
We have
strength.
26 varieties. No, 31 already. So there are a lot of different plants. But you have many skunk varieties. A lot of crossings are always from the skunk. So the basic was skunk, and they cross with the skunks to get a different plant. But you have really different plants like the Jack Flash, the Haze, the Jackarare, Black Domina. Those plants are completely different. Different taste, very strong, doesn't look like skunks at all. And those are the plants I like to grow and smoke.
And if a person comes in and buys some seeds from you, how many of these beauties are they to expect from 20 seeds?
You buy, and normally it's 15 seeds. We have some special offers from 20 or 30, but normally it's 15 seeds, and 95 to 100% comes out. That's okay. The seeds are tested. That's what we do all the time. But not all of it is female. You have some males in there. We say 50%, but in nature it's more 60-40. You need less male plants to fertilize a female. So you have about 8-9 good female plants, and from that female plants you can work with cuttings for a couple of years.
So they had a good plan. Planning for the future.
Planning for the future. Only one bag of seeds, yes.
I notice there's a wide range in prices for these seeds, starting way up there with the Jack Harrer and some of the newer ones.
G13. Yeah.
And going all the way down to the bargain basement.
Shiva Shanti. Shiva Shanti is the cheapest, 20 guilders. And the Mr. Nice, this G13 times hash plant, is 260 guilders. No, 260 guilders, yeah. And between that are 30 varieties, and the difference is the crossings we had to do with the plants to get that specific plant that people want. Some people want the sativa, but normally sativa has a low yield. So the people want a sativa with a big yield. So what we do is we cross the sativa and try to get that. And sometimes it's harder and more difficult to achieve that. And that's why you have also a price difference. And the quality as well. If it's a very strong plant, it's more expensive than a plant which is not so strong. It's the same as in all the coffee shops. You can buy 4 grams of grass for 25 guilders, but you can also buy 1 or 0.8 gram for 25 guilders, so that must be very strong then.
Hey, so here we are in the quintessential Amsterdam experience. We're about to go into a coffee shop and buy a little marijuana. So, let's go on inside. Well, there it is. Some Parvati, my gram.